Video games! Don't we just love them? When you think of video games, what immediately comes to your mind? Well, if you're like me, maybe you think of your favorite video game, whether it be a standalone game or a franchise, and maybe it's your go-to because of the amazing story that's portrayed, with great main characters, side characters, and a villain to complement it all together. Now, when we pick out a video game to be our all-time favorite, it usually has something to do with an emotional connection. Whether that be nostalgia from playing it from when you were younger, or maybe, if you're like me, because of the amazing story it has to portray. Story-based video games need to have a good setup. It needs to have a who, a how, and a why in order for everything to come together and work successfully. Games such as Doom, Ratchet & Clank, and Uncharted are all examples of video games that have stories within them that all conclude with amazing solid endings. However, when we finish these games, we might feel a bit bummed out, because how are we supposed to get more content from a game that we've just completed? Well, luckily, Hollywood has decided to answer that question for us, and that is the topic of today's video. We are going to be having a look at when video games become movies. Now, I'll be honest, when it comes to the idea of turning video games into movies, I don't think it's a bad idea. A lot of games lend a very simple blueprint for what the story should be about. They are essentially just interactive movies. You have a script with voice acting, dialogue, hell, even in some cases these actors do the moves that we see on the screen. So we've just established that turning video games into movies isn't a bad idea. It has the whole formula where all they need to do is follow it and they have a successful movie. And they have done this in the past. An example of this being Sonic, which, although admittedly did have a very rocky beginning, it actually turned into a very fun family film that was very loyal to Sonic's character. Now, that's one good example. But when it comes to giving more, it gets a little tricky. There is a problem that occurs when it comes to talking about video game movies, and that problem is that it's so hard to talk about because they're all just so mid. The thing about it is that I don't know how they do it, but every single time they try to put these video game characters into a movie setting, even though they have the blueprint right in front of them, they somehow mess it up. So I thought it would be a fun idea to go through some video game movies where, although they may have very interactive stories to portray in the video games, they somehow mess it up when turning it into the movie form. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome you to when video games get turned into movies. Oh wait, before we get into the video, I have a little message to say. Don't worry, this isn't an advertisement, this isn't anything like that. I mean, I've only got 2 subscribers, so who's going to sponsor me? I just wanted to say thank you for the support on the last video. That video actually, got me my first ever viewer who wasn't me. So thank you for that. And like I said, I gained 2 subscribers from that video, so thank you guys so much. I always made it my goal that I didn't want to subscribe to myself or ever like my own video before someone else did it. There's an ambulance outside. So I just want to say thank you very much for the support, and like a little message, please subscribe if you're new and like the video. That's all I gotta say. Back to the video. So one question you may have on your mind might be, why? Why do video games get turned into movie adaptations in the first place? Well, as I mentioned before, there is a solid reason why this happens, and it mostly comes down to a bit of laziness. Video games already have an entire story written out, with fleshed out characters, a storyline, and setup, so that movie studios see this as an easy way to pump out a movie. And they know that people will be interested in watching this, especially if it already has a big fan base behind the game already. So in their eyes, all they have to do is make a movie, and instantly they will have a full cinema. I mean, people love the games, so they will love the movie too, it's genius. However, over the years, it has been proven that this train of thought doesn't exactly work. So let's see why this doesn't work. And the way I thought of structuring this video was going through some exclusive games to exclusive consoles. And what better place to start than PlayStation? PlayStation has a stacked catalogue when it comes to their games. They have some all-time classics such as Crash Bandicoot, Spyro, the original Tomb Raider, the Uncharted series, and a whole lot more. And with such a great catalogue of story games, it was bound that soon they would do movie adaptations for some of these games. Now, I mentioned the Uncharted movie in the intro, so I think it would be fitting to talk about this movie first. The Uncharted series is one of the most revolutionary games to release on the PlayStation. The old school action and adventure game series really helped Naughty Dog's reputation because they already had such a great catalogue of game series. But this one really takes the cake for me. I think that the YouTuber Critical Drinker said it best when he said that it really does feel like you're watching a modern day Indiana Jones movie. But now that we live in the year 2024, it's not really the best comparison to make now, is it? However, it was inevitable that with such a great story, there was going to be a movie based on these games. In fact, there were talks about this all the way back in 2008. And 14 years later, we finally got it. And I can confidently say that, yeah, this is definitely a movie about Uncharted. Alright, so obviously I can't deny that the action of this movie is very good, and a lot of the dramatic scenes such as the plane scene are really well choreographed. But the thing about making a movie about a game such as Uncharted is that you need to do the characters justice. The scene in the Uncharted game where Nate and Sully first meet, we get to understand the character dynamics of these two. Nate is a bit of a naive kid who you could tell is a bit of a rookie when it comes to stealing, but Victor is a clear veteran. And once they have their first interaction, you can see the chemistry immediately that these two characters have with one another. Whereas in the movie, we're in a bar where Nate steals a bracelet, a random stranger starts talking to Nate, and then leaves. So we get no chemistry and not much context between why these two are even interacting in the first place. It really just comes off as confusing. And confusing is exactly the word that I would use for the next movie. Let's talk about Ratchet & Clank. Now, Ratchet & Clank is an all-time classic, especially for me, as it was my third game that I ever played when I was a kid. So when they announced the reboot of the original game, I was really excited. Now, when playing the game, there would always be these cutscenes and a notification would pop up saying that any recording of the gameplay would be stopped. And this always confused me on why this would happen, until I heard that there was a movie set to release about the game. And this got me even more excited. Until I actually watched it. This movie is so boring. The dialogue in this movie sounds like a child could have wrote it. It's that bad. It's actually really disappointing because in the PlayStation game, the banter that Ratchet & Clank have is really funny.
Look, plumber's crack.
What did you just say?
I said, look, the plumber's back.
Alright, wise guy.
They go at each other a lot, making fun of one another and not getting along so much. But as they continue on their quest, they eventually turn into really good friends and eventually best friends. However, in the PS4 game and the movie, the directors must have thought that the same adaptation would have been too mean because Ratchet & Clank don't have any chemistry whatsoever. And don't get me wrong, I still have a soft spot for this game, but it's only because of the interactive aspect. The movie doesn't even have any charm and is stale to the core. Now, one more example I want to use for PlayStation is the classic series of the Tomb Raider franchise. And don't come at me in the comments, I know you could have played it on PC, but PlayStation was the only console that you would have been able to play it on, so I'm counting it. Now, obviously, graphically, these games don't really stand the test of time, but it's no doubt that the nostalgia alone put Tomb Raider up there with some of the most best video games to ever release. And I know it's predictable for me to say, well, they made a movie about the series, because, you know, that's what the video's about. And that is true, don't get me wrong. But they didn't only make one movie. And they didn't even make only two. They made 3 of these things. The original 2 movies, Lara Croft Tomb Raider and its sequel, Lara Croft Tomb Raider The Crusade of Life, yeah, that's catchy, they both did respectfully well in the box office. However, when it came to critics, they were not fans, evidently. However, personally, I think that the first movie isn't too bad. The second though, I could take it or leave it. And when it comes to the attempt of rebooting that franchise to film, Well, okay, look, this movie isn't that bad by any means, but the thing about it is that it's not very loyal to the background of Lara Croft's character, and the story they portray in the movie is so plainly boring, and it's too safe that it just came across as dull. Alright, that's enough bagging on PlayStation. How about for this round, we do a joint round? Let's talk about Nintendo and Sega. Now, these two companies have had quite a good history together. Although sometimes they are rivals, at other times they settle their differences to create some very impactful games. And I don't even have to mention the iconic characters these guys have made, you already know who they are. So it's obvious that when you have something as iconic as these characters, you will inevitably want to branch that brand into other categories, and quite recently, this has been the case for Nintendo and Sega. Like, for example, a movie I mentioned before was Sonic. Now, when I said that this movie had a rocky beginning, it's mostly because of this. The terrible design they originally had for Sonic was something out of a nightmare, but luckily, Sega heard our cries and did end up changing it to look 1,000,000 times better. The movie itself also holds up, but not by doing anything too spectacular. It's just a fun film to throw on if there's nothing else to watch. Another thing I love about this movie is the way they portray Sonic's character. The charisma, the charm, the smart aleck personality, it's all there, which makes it fun for us to watch. And the sequel to this movie is very similar in this regard, by not being anything too special, but delivering a fairly solid follow-up and introducing Tails and Knuckles with also very good character traits. Now that's Sega, but when it comes to Nintendo, it's pretty spot on. And a recent example of this is the recent Mario movie. This movie also had a bit of a rocky start with the announcement of its voice cast.
What the f will be played by the one and only
Chris Pratt as Mario was a very bold choice to say the least, but it's not unlike Illumination to do this sort of thing by picking big names for their big characters. But even though there was some skepticism, the movie also turned out to be pretty solid. Again, nothing special, but it also wasn't bad. Stunning animation, a good story, and overall, it was really good. However, although this may be the first Mario movie that some people have ever watched, it's not the first one to ever release. Enter in the original 1993 Mario Bros. Movie. Released by Buena Vista with the help of Nintendo, the Super Mario Bros. Movie was released on May 28, 1993. But instead of animation like its follow-up, this one was actually live action. And this is where they made their first mistake. Based on Super Mario World, this game is set in an alternate Manhattan place. So instead of the Mushroom Kingdom, we are set in New York. And the casting is very iffy as well, because although Bob Hoskins does a really good job at playing Mario, John Leguizamo didn't really convince audiences of his portrayal of Luigi. The casting, mixed with the story just being terrible and a lot of other factors, made this movie an absolute bomb. And it was absolutely obliterated by critics. And also, this was Yoshi. How did they think this would work? Now that concludes Nintendo and Sega. Now, you may be thinking, alright, we've looked at PlayStation, we've looked at Nintendo, and Sega. The only other reasonable option to go for would be Xbox. But the thing is, Xbox doesn't have any video game movies. And you may say, well, what about the Halo show? That's a show, not a movie. Although the thing is, I really want to make a video about video games that have been turned into TV shows. So if you guys want to see that, leave a like on this video. Get me to 10 likes. I don't know, I'll do it. Hit that subscribe button. So I thought, how about we just talk about some random games? And to make it more interesting, I got the spinny wheel. I've got 3 games on this random wheel. So let's spin it and see what we get first. Oh no. So, Mortal Kombat. Now immediately, I already have a bone to pick with Mortal Kombat, because it's already getting on my nerves because it's spelt wrong. But honestly, I don't really have much to say about this game. I mean, it's a premise that's been done to death at this point, a side POV fighting game. Now admittedly, the game does have some really cool animations, such as, you know, the characters and also the finishes. I don't have much to say about it. But that being said, I can't knock the game too hard. It is a very legendary status type of game, and according to reviews, these games have been fairly solid throughout their 30+ year run. And because of these games being so successful, of course, there is a movie about them. But there isn't just one, there isn't two, but there are three. They never learn their lesson, do they? This is the same situation as the Tomb Raider movies, because the first two movies came out back in the 90s, and the third movie is just a reboot. It's also similar to Tomb Raider by the fact that these movies really suck. I mean, a 4% on Rotten Tomatoes? And look, I know that Rotten Tomatoes isn't the most credible source, but that's kind of embarrassing, right? And I mean, look at the movie's tagline, "Nothing in the world had prepared you for this." Yeah, nothing prepared me for how bad it would be. However, these movies did do really successfully, with the first movie making over 120 million, with a budget of only 20 million. And although the sequel didn't do as well, it still made $20 million, which is still a profit. And I mean, when it comes to the reboot movie, I won't lie, I get a bit of enjoyment out of it. I like the whole premise of the movie where the characters come into the real world. Although that has been done before, the characters themselves make it really interesting and pretty cool for the most part. Except for the main character. That guy just sucks. Alright, that's enough Mortal Kombat. What do we have next on the wheel? Okay, let's get this over with. So the reason I'm a bit tired to talk about this franchise isn't because of the games. I mean, the games are pretty fire. I mean, what can I say? It has a bit of personality to it. But the real reason for my reaction is that there are so many movies in this franchise. In fact, the titles of these movies tried to deceive you, because the 5th installment of these movies is titled The Final Chapter. But there's another movie after it. And if my argument of how every video game movie is mid had to be put into an example, this whole series would be just that. Because all of these movies are just mid. At least you could give the argument that the first couple of movies are a bit of a guilty pleasure for some people, but when it comes to the later ones, they're just so bad. The acting can be best described as wooden. There is no chemistry between these characters at all, and the plot just sucks. It tries to crush both the plots of the first and second game together, and when hearing this, it immediately sends red flags, because as Jeremy Jahns puts it best, it's hard enough to condense hours of gameplay from one game into a movie, but 2 entire stories into 1.5 hours of movie? That's pretty rough. And it really shows in what the movie delivers. And don't even get me started on the TV show, but I'll hold back. Remember, 10 likes and I'll talk about them. Alright, that just leaves us with the final one. Let's talk about Hitman. Now, Hitman holds a special place in a lot of people's hearts as a game that really changed the perception of stealth games entirely. Because even though the concept already existed, Hitman took it to another level, and putting the combination of a violent John Wick style game and movies with the same genre type being massive during that time, it was bound for there to be a movie about these games. And on November 21st, 2007, it was given to us through the release of the Hitman movie. And 8 years later, we got another one with Hitman Agent 47. And surprise, surprise, these movies stunk. I don't know why, but in this universe, every country's native tongue is English. These Nigerians speak English to each other. These Russians speak English to each other. Like, what is happening? Also, the fact that the majority of the population knows about the first movie, but mostly has no idea that there is even a sequel that exists, really shows how good these movies are. But they still both made a profit. And isn't it great that we just support such great movies, guys? Isn't that great? Now, that's not the end of it. I have an extra bonus round. A movie that recently came out and really crushed my heart. Let's talk about Borderlands. This movie blows all my days. This actually upsets me to talk about. I love Borderlands, the game. I love it. The unapologetic gore, the absolute mess that it makes. It's great. It's an amazing game franchise. And when I heard that they were making a movie, I was genuinely really excited, because they could make an R18 plus movie about all the gore and the gash and the blood and the... What? It's rated PG. Why did they think this was a good idea? And clearly, I'm not the only one who thinks this. This movie is getting bombed by critics. 4.3 out of 10 on IMDb, 9% on Rotten Tomatoes, 27% on Metacritic. Yeah. If this doesn't show you that video game movies are really bad and quite mid, I don't know what else will. Throughout this video, we have seen countless video games that have not just been turned into movies, but ultimate cinematic franchises. Although there was a lot of negativity in this video, the fact of the matter is that there are still some really good video game movies out there. But if 9 times out of 10 these movies are going to be really bad, or at best really mid, I don't see what the point is. So if there was a message to be at the end of this video, it would be this: stick to what works. You have a whole formula for how a movie should be. If you were in a fork in the road and you had to decide whether to go the right way or the wrong way, it should be pretty obvious which way you should go. And if there was something for you to take away from this video, it would be this: please hope that the Mortal Kombat 2 movie set to release gets cancelled. Who was asking for this movie?